Where the last stretch of Europe gives way to open Atlantic, a small green country holds its ground against a wind that never fully stops. From a distance, it reads like a postcard. Rolling fields, low stone walls, a pub on every corner. Look a little longer, and a different pattern begins to show through the green. Quiet cottages with the roofs still on and no one left inside. Villages whose population signs stopped matching reality a long time ago. This is Ireland. And this is not a story about how green it looks. It is a story about absence and about what came after it. Between 1841 and 1961, the counties that now make up the Republic of Ireland lost more than half their people. Not to war and not to any single disaster. To hunger first, and then, for over a century afterward, simply to leaving. It was not until 2022 that the population climbed back above 5 million, the first time that had happened since 1851. This is the story of a country that spent nearly 200 years learning how to lose its own people, and what it looks like now that some of them, in one way or another, are finally staying. Before anything else about this country makes sense, there is the rain. It falls somewhere between 150 and 225 days a year. Depending on which coast is being asked. It is rarely heavy. More often it is a fine, drifting mist that locals call a soft day. Spoken not as a complaint, but almost as a greeting. The ground here never fully dries, and because of that, the green never really fades. Locals call it 40 shades of green, and after a few days in County Clare, the phrase stops sounding like something written for a tourist board and starts sounding like the truth. Most visitors arrive expecting forest. Ireland's own name seems to promise it. What they find instead is grass. Endless, thick, impossibly bright grass. Because the trees that once stood here were cleared centuries ago, for farmland. For fuel. For the shipyards of a colonial power that needed the timber more than the island did. What grew back was not woodland, it was pasture, and that pasture, quietly and without much fanfare, became the foundation of an entire rural way of life. Feeding the dairy herds behind some of the richest butter in the world. And the sheep whose wool still leaves this island as sweaters and blankets. Drive through County Kerry or County Clare, and the same picture repeats itself for hours. Low stone walls dividing hillsides into small green fields. Cattle and sheep scattered across slopes too steep and too wet for almost anything else to grow. It is not a landscape that was designed. It is a landscape that simply happened, one wet century after another. And it is this same rhythm of rain and grass and patience that, eventually, shaped almost everything else about how people here live. And why so many of them, over the centuries, chose to leave it behind. The Republic of Ireland is home to a little over 5 million people, fewer than live in a single large American city. That smallness shapes daily life here more than almost anything else. Walk into a shop in a small town in County Leitrim or County Mayo, and the person behind the counter usually already knows what you're there for, and probably your family too. It is not performed friendliness. It is simply what happens in a country this thinly spread. Multiple generations often live along the same road. Sometimes on the same farm, a family has worked for 100 years, and when someone is struggling, neighbors tend to notice before they are asked. There is an old tradition here called a meatheel, where a community comes together, unpaid, to bring in a harvest or rebuild a barn for a family that has fallen behind. It still happens, sometimes as physical work, just as often now as a quiet fundraiser at the local hall. There is a phrase, too, Said Mila Falcha, 100,000 welcomes, printed on more mugs than anyone can count, but meant sincerely all the same. A short walk to the shop for milk and a newspaper can easily turn into 10 minutes of conversation about the weather, or the local team, or a neighbor's new roof, not because anyone is in a rush to talk, but because almost nobody here is in a rush at all. Along the west coast, in the regions known as the Gaeltacht, Irish is still the language people reach for first, not for visitors, but because it is simply how they think. And in a country that has spent so much of its history losing people, a language surviving alongside them carries its own kind of quiet weight. That weight has a history behind it, and it goes back further than almost anything else in this story. To understand why Ireland's population moves the way it does, the story has to start with a single crop. The potato arrived here in the 16th century and, within a few generations, became the food an enormous share of the rural population depended on almost entirely. Cheap to grow, reliable, enough to feed a family from a small plot of land. When blight destroyed the crop in 1845 and kept destroying it for years afterward, what followed was not simply a bad harvest. It became known, in Irish, as An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger. Roughly 1 million people died. Roughly as many again emigrated during those years alone. And the leaving did not stop once the blight finally passed. It simply became habit, repeated by one generation after another for the century that followed. By 1961, the population had fallen to under 3 million, less than half of what it had been before the hunger began. None of this stays sealed away in a museum here. It survives in the language, still spoken in the Gaeltacht, still taught in every school, still printed on every road sign beside the English. It survives in stone, too. In County Meath, not far from Dublin, sits Newgrange, a passage tomb raised around 3200 BC, older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge. Once a year, on the morning of the winter solstice, the rising sun finds a narrow gap above its entrance and floods the inner chamber with light for a matter of minutes, exactly as it has for 5,000 years. Nobody fully knows why it was built this way, only that whoever built it understood something about permanence in a place that has never made permanence easy. And every Sunday, that same endurance shows up somewhere far more ordinary. Hurling has been played on this island for longer than almost anything else here, an amateur game with no salaries and no professional league, decided every week by farmers and electricians and teenagers playing for the parish they grew up in, not for a paycheck. The hunger explains why so many people once had no choice but to leave. It does not, on its own, explain what Ireland eventually built instead. While the countryside still runs on rain and grazing cattle, Dublin runs on something else entirely. In the years locals still call the Celtic Tiger, Ireland became the European home for some of the largest technology and pharmaceutical companies on Earth. Along Dublin's docklands, now nicknamed Silicon Docks, glass office towers stand only minutes from churches that have been there for centuries. A country that was still mostly agricultural well into the last century now runs a genuinely modern economy, and the change happened inside a single generation, not several. It is entirely possible to leave a wet hillside farm in Kerry in the morning and be sitting in a Dublin office by early afternoon, and that drive covers far more than distance. Cork and Galway have followed smaller versions of the same path, each building its own cluster of offices and labs around medieval streets that have barely changed. Ireland did not choose between its past and its future. It simply built the second one on top of the first, glass and steel resting on foundations that are, in places, 1,000 years older than the companies now standing on them. None of that transformation, though, came without a cost that rarely makes it onto a postcard. Irish food was built by people who survived on what the land and sea actually gave them, not on what looked impressive on a plate. Soda bread needs no yeast and no time to rise, just flour, buttermilk, and a hot oven, because rural kitchens could not always afford to wait. A proper Irish stew is lamb, potato, carrot, and onion, left to simmer until it falls apart on its own. Along the coast, mussels are steamed in garlic and cream, and mackerel goes from the boat to the pan the same morning it is caught. And there, once again, is the potato. The same crop that once brought catastrophe now sits at the center of almost every family dinner, boiled or mashed or roasted beside a Sunday roast. Nobody here treats it as a painful memory. It is treated the way it always was before 1845. Simple, reliable food that fed a nation. But it carries a little more weight than it looks like it should, in a country that remembers exactly what happened the one time it failed. Along the western edge of the country, Ireland stops arguing with the Atlantic and simply lets it win. The cliffs of Moher rise more than 200 meters straight out of the ocean, roughly the height of a 60-story building, carved by rivers that no longer exist. More than 1.5 million people climb them every year, and the wind up there is strong enough, on the wrong day, to knock a grown adult off balance. Further out, off the coast of Kerry, a sharper shape rises from the sea. Skellig Michael looks almost too deliberate to be natural, and in the 6th century, a small group of monks decided it was exactly the place to build a monastery. Not near the rock, but on top of it. They carved hundreds of stone steps by hand and built shelters with no mortar at all, structures that are still standing 14 centuries later, on an island with no fresh water, everything hauled up those steps by hand. The monks stayed for roughly 600 years before finally leaving for good, one of the earliest examples, in this country's long history, of a community choosing to walk away from a place that could no longer hold them. Out in Galway Bay, the Aran Islands are bare limestone with almost no natural soil, and for generations, islanders built their own farmland from nothing. Seaweed and sand packed into cracks in the rock, one basketful at a time, until 3 islands together held over 1,000 kilometers of dry stone walls, built without a drop of mortar and strong enough to outlast Atlantic storms for centuries. And on the north coast, in Northern Ireland, more than 40,000 basalt columns rise out of the sea in near-perfect hexagons. So precise that locals once explained them with a giant rather than a volcano, and standing on them, the legend still feels more believable than the geology. Different corners of the same small country, and the same lesson repeated in each one. Whatever gets built here, by monks or islanders or the earth itself, tends to outlast the people who first explained it. Ireland's rural roads are called boreens, narrow, hedge-lined lanes built for a cart, not a car, and they still decide how close or how far anything actually feels. A journey that looks like 15 minutes on a map can take 3 times as long on a boreen that bends around field boundaries drawn 2 centuries ago. That same geography once carried a harsher meaning. During the worst famine years, it was often the most remote parishes, a boreen away from any port or market, that lost the highest share of their people. Today, those same roads carry a very different signal. High-speed broadband has quietly reached deep into rural Ireland, and it has created a strange, modern kind of freedom. A person can live at the end of a boreen with barely a neighbor in sight, and still hold down a full-time job with a company headquartered 90 minutes away in Silicon Docks. The isolation that once emptied these parishes has become, for a small but growing number of people, the very reason they can afford to stay in them. For most young people leaving today, though, it is rarely the road that is the real problem. It is what waits at the end of it. Here is the part the tourism board does not put on a billboard. Housing in Ireland has become brutally expensive, in the cities most of all, and the numbers back it up. The median home now sells for around €384,000, and in Dublin that figure climbs well past €490,000. Prices have risen more than 160% since their lowest point in 2012, pricing an entire generation of young Irish people out of ever owning a home in the place they grew up. At the same time, small rural towns are losing people in the opposite direction as work pulls the young toward the cities, leaving behind an aging population and, in some villages, the slow closing of the last shop, the last post office, the last pub on the street. It is an uncomfortable echo of something older. Not famine and forced emigration this time, but an economy so successful in one part of the country that it has, almost as a side effect, made staying in the place you are from harder than leaving it. The cities cannot build fast enough. The villages cannot hold on to who they have left. A different century, a different cause, and somehow, still, the same quiet outcome. A young couple, a nurse and a school teacher between them, can turn up to view a modest house an hour outside Dublin and find dozens of other couples waiting for the same viewing. Neither of them is chasing anything extravagant. They are chasing the version of adulthood their own parents managed on a single income a generation earlier. Most of them do not get the house. Some quietly widen their search. Others start looking abroad instead, not because they want to leave Ireland, but because staying has, for the moment, stopped feeling like something entirely up to them. For many young Irish people, a few years abroad is treated less like a tragedy now, and more like an ordinary rite of passage. The ones who plan on coming back, though, are coming back to housing costs their grandparents, who left for very different reasons, never had to face at all. Rain shapes daily life here more than any single other thing, and the pub is where the country goes to wait it out. It is never simply a bar. It is the community's living room, the place where a funeral is mourned, a wedding is celebrated, and a Saturday match is argued over in the same corner booth, sometimes on the very same weekend. Inside every home, the kettle is treated almost like a member of the family. Tea is offered before conversation even properly begins, a small, automatic gesture that says, "Sit down, you're welcome here," long before a single word is exchanged. It sounds like a small thing. It is not. In a country this wet and this quiet, these tiny daily rituals, the tea, the pub, a neighborly wave on a narrow road, are the actual infrastructure holding communities together, especially in the towns where every other kind of infrastructure is thinning. Some evenings, that same infrastructure has a soundtrack. A seashun needs no stage and no ticket. A fiddle player sets down a pint. Someone else produces a tin whistle, and within a few bars, whoever else in the room knows the tune simply joins in, uninvited and unasked. These sessions carried Irish music through every wave of emigration this country has ever known, because the tunes traveled with the people who left, collected in rural pubs in the 1800s, kept alive for a generation in dance halls 3,000 miles away, and carried home decades later by the grandchildren of the people who had gone. The music has been making the same journey the population has, and eventually, in part, back again. In Dublin, that same instinct simply grows larger. Long queues form outside the Guinness Storehouse, the country's single most visited paid attraction. And not far away, another queue forms for the Book of Kells, an illustrated manuscript created by monks over 1,000 years ago. One building sells a drink, the other protects a very old book. Both queues, Most days stretch out the door, and that contrast alone says something true about how this country holds its past and its present at the same time. Add the modern pressure of housing to the older, deeper pattern of emigration, and Ireland is left facing a question that has, in one form or another, followed it for 2 centuries. How do you hold on to a place when the reasons to leave it keep changing, but somehow never quite disappear? There is no clean answer here. Rural Ireland has spent 150 years learning to live with departure, updating who leaves and why with each generation, from famine ships to construction jobs abroad, to a housing market that simply will not make room. What never changes is the shape of what's left behind. A shop that does not reopen, a school that merges with the next parish over, a road that grows a little quieter every year. And yet the wider number tells a different story than the mood on the ground sometimes suggests. Here is the part the population chart alone does not show. The people who left over the past 2 centuries did not simply disappear from the story. They became a second Ireland, scattered across the world. The global Irish diaspora is estimated at somewhere around 70 million people, descendants of the famine ships, the post-war laborers, the emigrants of harder decades since. That is roughly 13 times the population currently living on the island itself. Boston, New York, Sydney, and Liverpool all carry Irish names in their oldest neighborhoods for the same reason that County Mayo carries empty cottages. It is the same story, told from opposite ends. Every March, that scattered second Ireland comes home, at least in spirit. Cities that have never seen a boreen in their lives dye their rivers green and march down main streets for St. Patrick's Day, a celebration that began as a modest religious feast and grew, largely through the sheer scale of the diaspora, into one of the most widely marked national days on Earth. A quiet but genuine part of the modern economy now runs on the descendants of people who once left with almost nothing, flying back to stand in a graveyard where a great-great-grandparent is buried, tracing a surname on a headstone that matches their own. In a strange way, the very emigration that once nearly emptied this country is also the reason it is known almost everywhere on it. A nation of a little over 5 million people carries a presence in the world that has very little to do with tourism marketing, and everything to do with the fact that a version of Ireland has been quietly living outside Ireland for 200 years, and has never quite let go of where it came from. In 2022, for the first time since 1851, the population of Ireland climbed back above 5 million. Ask people why they stay. In a country that spent a century and a half teaching its own children how to leave, and nobody reaches for anything dramatic. Someone mentions a neighbor who still knows their name. Someone else brings up the kettle that never goes cold, or a parish jersey they would never trade for a salary. But most people, sooner or later, land on the same quiet answer. Not because Ireland is easy. It has never once been easy. But because, after everything, it is still theirs. The rain has not stopped. The grass is still green because of it. And somewhere on a wet hillside tonight, a kettle is going on in a kitchen that, very nearly, twice over, might never have had anyone left to boil it.